the Thursday afternoon session, Thursday, October 4th, 2018, of the Portland City Council. We're now in session. Carla, please, well, first of all, hello.
Good afternoon.
Please call the roll.
Udaly. Fritz.
Here.
Fish. Saltzman.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. And Commissioner Udaly had to step out, but later on she asked me if I would read a statement on her behalf when we get to the substantive items. So if people, Michelle, could you help remind me to do that so I do not forget to do that?
I can do that. I can remind you.
Very good. So without further ado, could you go ahead and read the statement?
I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you very much. Carla, could you please read our one item for today?
Okay. Item 1040, adopt the Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy and direct early implementation actions.
Very good. And I think Eric Engstrom, are you going to go ahead and introduce our afternoon agenda?
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Engstrom. I'm with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and with me is Ryan Curran. Thank you for considering today's resolution to adopt the Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy. This is an important step as we plan to expand the region's transit system into the corridor. New transit is critical to bringing better access to more housing, education, and job opportunities. That said, we know displacement risk from the rising cost of living and lack of affordable housing threatens the existing economic and cultural diversity in the corridor. That's already happening. Displacement harms households and disrupts communities, as well as creating obstacles to achieving the region's long-range growth plans. If the households that are most dependent on transit—
I'm sorry, Eric, we have a problem with the closed captioning. Could we pause for just a moment?
Absolutely.
Fix that? Thanks. Carla, should we take a recess for a couple of minutes while
Yes,
they fix
let's
that?
do that.
Why don't we just take a brief recess?
10.
Yeah. Carla, we're taking a brief recess.
Good evening, or good afternoon.
Yes.
You do what? You do what? But you know, this is good morning.
All right, very good. And I just learned something interesting. It's not closed captioning, it is open captioning.
Well, it's just
There you have
captioning.
it. And it's working, is that correct, Carla?
They've got you now, yes.
Very good, thank you. Go ahead, Eric, sorry for the interruption.
No problem. I'll just pick up where I left off. If households who are most dependent on transit are displaced out of the corridor, they could be pushed into areas with much less frequent transit, put into cars, and contribute to congestion and carbon emissions, with the resulting loss of ridership for the transit system. So the housing strategy is not only about housing, but it's also important for the success of the transit investment itself. We want to get ahead of the predictable cycle of real estate speculation and market pressures to help ensure there are new housing choices available when light rail comes. In 2016, Council directed us to develop a housing strategy in relation to the light rail project. We teamed up with the City of Tigard to develop a unified strategic approach to housing for the entire Southwest Corridor. At last month's work session, you heard about the corridor's housing needs and the goals that we are proposing. Today, you'll hear how we will work with our partners to meet our goals, and I'll turn it over to Ryan to introduce some of the project partners.
Thank you, Eric. So with this resolution, we are affirming the city's commitment to equitable growth. We're adopting this housing strategy and directing bureaus to begin implementation. And I want to pause and just take a moment to thank Susan Anderson. Today's her last day as the director of BPS, and she created a lot of the space and resources to do this work and help call these important questions, and just want to acknowledge that. So in doing so with today's work, we should recognize how much of a team effort this will be. So our community partners are here to share why this is the right approach and what role they will play in implementation. You'll hear from them next. The bureaus taking a leadership role in implementation are here to describe the actions they will take. You will also hear from our jurisdictional partners who will describe how they are contributing to the housing solution. We'll have some public testimony and council discussion, and then council can take action. We'd like to start today's hearing by acknowledging our partners. There's an endorsement letter from our advisor group. It's included in the final strategy, which you can find in your binder. I want to thank them for the many long hours of work sessions and community engagement that they did to help develop this body of work. In addition, many other individual organizations and commissions weighed in and submitted letters of support. Those are on the record today, and I have copies here for reference. And you'll hear from a number of them as well. So now we will hear from a few of our community partners. I'll introduce them as they come up to the table. Alan Lazo, the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. We have Rachel Duke, the Executive Director of the Community Partners for Affordable Housing. Pam Fan is the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Community Alliance of Tenants. And with her is Amina Omar, a Southwest Community Tenant Leader. And
Very good, thank you.
Turn it over to Al.
Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Alan Lazo, the Executive Director at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. And as you know, I come before you on many different occasions and talk about many different issues, but I'm particularly proud to be a part of this effort, and especially because it's an effort to address early on these systemic, institutional, and even market forces that come into play in large public infrastructure investments like the Southwest Corridor. So for us as an organization that's dedicated to eliminating discrimination in housing and promoting housing justice and ensuring access to housing throughout the state of Oregon, as an organization, we strongly support the work that's being done through the Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy. This investment is a big opportunity for us to advance the obligations, the duties, and the commitment that we have as a city and a community to fair housing throughout our region, and address also some of the past harms that we've seen in communities through large public infrastructure investment. We all are aware of the history of racial discrimination and exclusion in and around areas like the Southwest Corridor. The areas in South Portland, for instance, that are along part of the preferred alignment were redlined in the 1930s and 40s, while neighborhoods in some of the Southwest Hills near there had private racially restrictive deed covenants that restricted and denied the opportunity for people of color to own homes within the corridor. This history continues to have disparities for these communities today. And when we look at those racial disparities, they are in housing cost burden, in wealth gap, home ownership gaps, as well as income throughout the corridor and throughout the region. So we know that public investments now coming online in this area must be made with the explicit goals of addressing this unjust history. We need to work to determinedly eliminate and specifically eliminate these disparities and create better outcomes for all the people in our communities. we have an opportunity right now, which doesn't come along very often, to undo a past history and do the right thing moving forward. We know that buying land for future affordable housing and purchasing existing apartment buildings, other housing, naturally occurring affordable housing in those areas throughout the corridor and the preferred alternative will help preserve affordability and opportunity and should be our top priorities in this strategy. These types of capital investments must also, though, be paired with specific new tenant protections and services in ways that can help, again, preserve opportunity for communities that are both in place and also seeking to access opportunity in this corridor. Specifically, again, we hope to see targeted education, the kind of work that we do as an organization to educate and do outreach to folks about these issues, as well as enforcement of current fair housing laws in the corridor as these displacement pressures, again, that are systemic, institutional, and market, rise with this large public infrastructure investment we see there. So as an organization, I thank you and commend you all for the leadership role that you play here at the local level, and also thank you for the foresight on the issues of fair housing and transit equity that this investment can make. If you and our regional partners follow through on these commitments in the Southwest Corridor equitable housing strategy, you will set a new model for foresight in housing equity, and we look forward to following your progress on that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Alan. We appreciate it. Thanks for the great work you do.
Thank you.
Great. Hi, I'm Rachel Duke.
Hi.
I'm the Executive Director at Community Partners for Affordable Housing. We are a community housing development organization, and we serve this whole area, and I'll talk about that in a second, along the corridor. But I also want to say personally, it's pretty fun to be here today, having had so much time working in Multnomah County and the city of Portland, and having now the opportunity to really understand how, as a region, we are all connected. And after doing work in Multnomah County and now really doing a lot of work in Washington County, I feel like I understand that on a whole new level. So I just want to put that out there too, that this is an amazing opportunity for us to look at with a regional effort. Community housing, Community Partners for Affordable Housing starts with a senior property in Hillsdale. Much of our housing is located along the Southwest Corridor. It ends right now with the senior housing project in Tigard. We have a lot of family housing in between, and we're currently working on a permanent supportive housing project in the Tigard Triangle. So, and that's been financed, so now we're just starting with the whole permit process. And Sean Farrelly is here, so I'll probably bend his ear later before I leave. So I wanted to say we're super committed and super excited about this opportunity. We had the opportunity to participate not just in the Southwest Housing Strategy, the Equitable Housing Strategy, which was a great process and which came up, as you know, with a number of excellent recommendations. But we also, I also had the opportunity to be a member of the Community Advisory Committee that looked at kind of what the locally preferred option should be for the light rail. So I feel like I really have, based on those two processes, some good insight on the interconnection between transit and housing, and in particular, our focus, which is affordable housing. We know how important it is to be sure that folks who are currently living along the corridor can benefit from this incredible upcoming public investment. At the same time, we know that we're expecting another 10,000 people along the corridor by 2035. So with those things in mind, it just really, really speaks to the importance of having this strategy adopted. So I'm going to say kind of three things that I'm excited to ask about, and want to thank you ahead of time for your leadership on these things. One is to be sure that we are tying up land now and prioritizing it for housing, and in particular affordable housing. As Alan already mentioned, and as you know, this is our moment. This is our time to make that investment so that we can benefit from that investment for years and years to come. And the longer we wait, the harder that investment is to make because it becomes more expensive. impressive. We want to create an urban renewal area along the Portland portion of the corridor. I know that Tigard has set aside some urban renewal areas in the Triangle and downtown Tigard as well. And in the Portland area have a large set aside for affordable housing. And then fund the request from the community-based organizations active in the corridor to continue to engage low-income households. Super important for folks to be represented in coming up with the strategies and the solutions to make sure that their lives are rich and have all those things in it that we all want. Good place to live, access to opportunities, ways to grow, all of it. Housing is foundational to that. So again, thank you very much for your leadership. It's really, really great to be here today representing a new organization. Thanks.
Thank you for being here, Rachel. We appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Commissioners, my name is Pam Fawn. I'm with the Community Alliance of Tenants and want to thank you for your time. And I want to share with you, I get the pleasure and the amazing job of working with community members to express themselves and to assert their rights along the corridor. So we partnered with the City of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability as a response to our need to create inclusive conversations and be able to lift the voices that are invisible in our planning projects through that we had advocated for through the city's comprehensive plan. So we're really appreciative that the city heard us and that we're actually actively doing those things. But there's a next step to that. So in partnership with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, we were able to do a Southwest Corridor leadership cohort with renters. We were able to center the questions around housing and housing needs around folks who are probably most vulnerable to changes in shifts in the market. And that's, of course, renters, and particularly low-income renters, or folks on fixed incomes, folks with disabilities. And again, these identities are mixed, right? It's not one individual person that is one thing, like one, they're just a refugee, but they also could be disabled. They also could be a single parent, right? So there's a multiplicity of vulnerability that's happening, and you only know until you talk to people. So we had a chance to do a cohort. It was a 3-month process where we met every other month and we recruited families and individuals along the corridor. So I want to share that we worked together to come up with some community-based solutions. And there are 3 basic categories of those community-based solutions, essentially preservation. So what both Alan and Rachel have said in terms of really acquiring and thinking through what land is available and starting to plan that out and actually consider numbers of units. That's what we want to do as early and awesome, and preserve often as possible, and preserve the units that currently people live in. So, and then next is this piece around community voice and ensuring that community members are consistently a part of this process. We want to ensure that folks who are a part of our cohort, and they'll get a chance to share with you in a second, that they are actually influencing the process. And then lastly, it's this piece around costs in housing and costs in transportation, is that what are we doing to ensure that programs, services, and efforts across the region are ensuring that people stay in place and that costs are not astronomical and going out of control. And so those are the main solutions that the community members came up with and through the cohort process. And we wanted to share those with you. But one thing that is really critical is that CAT and our other community-based partners will continue to be at this table regardless of what decisions are made to ensure that community voices are at the center of the conversation. We feel like the plan is a good direction and it's a good place to start, and we'd like to see more, right? We know that this crisis is so much deeper than one plan can resolve. And so we will continue to push for better and more. So thank you very much for the time, and I want to introduce Amina.
Hi, my name is Amina Omar, and thank you for having us here today. I'm a mother of 4 children, so my main thing for my kids is to have a home, a safe home, and a safe environment, and that's the reason why we're here today. So I'm talking about the reason we're here today to talk about is rent increasing. I live in Portland for like 13 years, and my first apartment I rented out was $675, but right now the same apartment is $1,300. It's almost double. So it's like my main concern is rent increasing every single day, because we live in check to check every single daily. So in our wage are not increased, but the rent is increasing. Like, I just talked to one of my friends who's a single mother, and she was just telling me, like, this month, it was the hardest month ever because she couldn't even buy grocery for her child because she has to pay like $1,300. Like, all her check has to go towards her rent. So she was like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it the next year. I'm like, just have a hope. You will make it. You will survive and you'll make it. But it's true in our area, the rent is increasing every single year. That's the main thing that we have. And we hope that you guys could, work with something and just maybe fix the rates, just kind of like to have like maybe 30 years just in one, instead of every year increasing the rent, but just kind of have like a long term. So for those people like my friend who's a single mother could buy food for a child and could buy other things. And it's really difficult and it's really hard for her. And so for so many people, and also that we like the area that we're in, it's a southwest area. And we like there because our kids go to schools where they're familiar with their friends, with their like, peers. And also we have a mosque that's very close to us. And our community, we all kind of like familiar. We're all comfortable over there. We're not like, going to the other area, nobody's singling us out because we're all in the same, comfortable area, comfortable zone, basically. So we're there it's like a home to us.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Commissioner Fish and then Commissioner Fritz and then Commissioner Saltzman.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Alan and Rachel, and you may have similar answers, so you don't have to do it in stereo, but I want to put the question out there. We have a housing crisis, and we're approaching it through multiple strategies. The mayor has taken the unprecedented step of taking all development-related bureaus under his portfolio. So from the moment an idea is hatched to the ribbon cutting, he has all the bureaus that touch that project, and he has said that he wants to see a streamlining of the permit process. He wants to see affordable housing go to the head of the line. He wants to see more concierge services. He wants to look at ways of reducing fees and other barriers. So that's a huge step forward, and the mayor has said, even hold me accountable for those changes. I think the closest we ever came to that was when almost all the development bureaus, related bureaus, reported to Commissioner then Kafori, who had at least 3 of the 5. So that's a positive development. I'm very active in both measures 102 and 26-199. One of the things we've learned in conversations with sister counties is that not all of us have the same suite of benefits that we offer to induce development. So for example, in Washington County, they don't have SDC waivers. They are now actively looking at ways of reducing the burden of SDCs, systems development charges, to streamline the development. That's a very productive conversation. There's lots of things that we can do to streamline the process. But I want to ask you this. We're also hearing from particularly some editorial boards, but others, that we should compromise on our values around this housing that's part of our equity agenda. And it goes something like this. We should not necessarily put opportunity at the forefront if we can build it cheaper in places where dirt is cheaper. We should find ways of working with BOLI and the State Labor Commissioner to reduce costs. There is an ongoing discussion about whether prevailing wage adds too much. In other words, paying people who build the housing enough money so they don't have to actually live in the housing, that they can have other choices. We are told that some of our sustainability goals add unnecessary costs. And we are told that you can build short-term housing that has to be refinanced and rebuilt rather than long-term housing with 60 and 90-year covenants. And in an emergency, sometimes you build cheap for the short term, not the long term. So I would just want to give each of you an opportunity to advise us as to whether, in thinking about an equitable housing strategy for the Southwest Corridor, which is a big deal, whether we should be compromising on those values.
So if I might, I'll start, because as you know, I don't actually work in the affordable housing area, so I'm not actually going to address the affordable issue. The area I work in is around equity and addressing that. And so when we talk about housing in that context, I think we have to talk about opportunity. And in that context, I think that we need to focus on just what I said in my statement. We need to focus on very specific remedies to a history that has denied opportunity to many in our communities and has the potential to do so again. You know, we have some very clear history here in our community of involuntary economic displacement as a result of large public infrastructure investments. And we ought to pay heed to that. You know, I will never sit here, I'll never come before you and tell you that there is one solution to this. You know, one of the things I tell people about gentrification and displacement is it's a extraordinarily complex issue. People ask me, who solved it around the country? And I think the answer is no one, because it is a set of very complex local issues that need to be sorted out. And so we shouldn't ignore that. And one of the things we shouldn't do is ignore that there might be some opportunities that we need to create at the expense of other things. So that's the answer I have for you about the perspective we have as an organization, that we need to focus on creating those opportunities in a place like the Southwest Corridor and be purposeful about it. Otherwise, we will lose that opportunity.
And so let's be clear, when you say opportunity, you're saying building in areas where we displace people through gentrification and other strategies.
Yeah.
And the dirt is necessarily more expensive. Yes, you could replace the housing on the fringes of the community in places where the dirt is cheaper, but you'd be putting people next to schools that aren't as successful, next to business districts that aren't as well developed, next to infrastructure that isn't as built up, and you lose the dividend.
Absolutely. That's absolutely what I'm saying. So thank
and by the
you
way,
for being more eloquent.
It's also the law.
I didn't want to go there, but you're absolutely right.
Even Dr. Carson acknowledges that opportunity is the law.
Sometimes when I use the term we, I mean you, and we have an obligation to affirmatively further fair housing in our community. And that recognizing that point is one of the ways we can do that. One of the things I've started to say about housing is that we quite often think about housing as the roof over our heads. But we really ought to think about housing as access to opportunity out the front door. And that's really what we need to think about housing for. Not only is it shelter, it is also access to opportunity. And this kind of discussion is what that is about. What opportunities are we giving folks out the front door? That is different when we do it in a place like the Southwest Corridor versus someplace way outside of that area.
Rachel, you want to add anything?
I do. One thing I do want to say is actually we did get SDC waivers from the city of Tigard for our current project. So I just want to give them a shout out and say that Washington,
but they're looking at it now holistically.
Partly because Sean's right behind me, but also.
Chair Dyke has said he wants to look at this now more holistically because historically they have not waived SDCs, and we have in the city of Portland.
That's true. There's a lot more that can be done in Washington County. I'm the first to agree with you there, but I just wanted to point that out. I think when I remember taking public policy classes where one of the first things I learned is that there's always multiple and conflicting goals whenever you do any project at all. And I feel like housing has kind of absorbed that a little bit. There are multiple and conflicting goals sometimes around issues around sustainability and an opportunity and how do we make a good solid investment that's going to last for a long time. And so maybe in some ways they're conflicting, but in other ways they're all driving towards the kind of future that we want for our community. So I guess what I would say is there may be some conflicts in terms of cost, but they're all kind of getting us to the place where we want to be. And when I think about the opportunity that we're trying to engender in our communities, it includes access to education, access to nature, access to services, access to jobs. All of that stuff is important in terms of having a good life. And housing, again, is foundational to all those things. Access to health, access to good health, all of those things. So building in a place like the corridor makes a lot of sense because it's literally the access is right there. It's right there. You're going to step out your door and you're going to have that. And then I guess the other thing I would say is nothing is cheap. Cheap isn't cheap. You have housing that wasn't built well, and in 10 years you have to rehab that housing. That is not cheap. That's actually really expensive. It's a reinvestment of funds that could have gone to new units. So I just want to say, building something on the cheap is not even real. It's just putting costs off till later. And that I just want to make sure that's
I'm so glad you said that, and I'll just close by acknowledging something that Commissioner Fritz has led the last few years. She has prioritized investments of systems development charge money and other capital dollars in building out a park system in undeveloped areas of our city, particularly east of 82nd. She has done it intentionally, and she's done it at the, where she's had to prioritize at the expense of other very compelling projects. In all the years, though, that she led that agenda, I never remembered her coming in saying, we've come up with the cheapest and easiest path to building a park. We took a community vision, we scaled it back, we value engineered it. It's got a postage stamp dog run. It's got a surplus children's playground, and it's got a loo that was decommissioned recently, but we put some more paint on it and we put it there. I've never heard her say that, because I've never heard the community say what they wanted was us to go race to the bottom. Yeah. So I appreciate your comments.
Commissioner Fish, do you mind if I answer
Please.
your question around this value proposition of opportunity? I think actually the case in point, what we were able to uncover with the Southwest Corridor leadership cohort was that there's a lot of housing opportunity in apartment buildings that are currently people are renting from, in terms of, they're called the naturally occurring affordable housing, and preserving those units, getting those buildings up to code, and ensuring that folks have stable rents, as Amina was saying. These are family-sized units. The complex right next to the mosque on Capitol Highway, they're 3-bedroom units, right? These are actually apartments that families can continue to grow in and actually have multiple generations going to Markham Elementary across the street. So it's not a question of building new only, it's also preserving and using the infrastructure we do have.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Fritz.
Commissioner Fisher, I have to start off by saying that we also brought in all the projects on budget because of your great staff within Portland Parks and Recreation, who did that value engineering and actually was able to provide better, even more than the community asked for. So phenomenal. And also that another of the new parks is Spring Garden Park, which is just a mile from the Barber Transit Center, in an area that people might not think is parks deficient, but it is, and it's going to serve everybody from the transit center. And indeed, we recently did a local improvement district from the park that'll get people down to Barbara on a sidewalk. We're so excited to have a sidewalk in the neighborhood. Thank you for participating. That's my neighborhood too, so I'm so glad to know that you find it welcoming and that it's yours also. My kids went to Markham Elementary and I live up the hill. And it wasn't necessarily that way 25 years ago. So the mosque community and the neighborhood association worked really hard and have just delighted in each other since. And so I'm really happy that you're here. Thank you for that. And kudos to the project staff and everybody who decided to give some of the contract money to the Muslim Educational Trust. When I got the Southwest Neighborhood News newsletter this month and saw that the contact information was Muslim Educational Trust and 2 women there, those are the folks that people are to call for with questions. I was like, yes, we're finally learning to invest in the community and invest in the organizations that are doing good work in the community. So thank you for that. My question for all of you, and also perhaps for Bureau of Planning, is about local businesses. Because I know from living in the neighborhood that when the 44 bus turns around at Barber Transit Center because it can't get up the hill in the snow, most of the businesses are still open, because not only are they locally owned, but they have local workers. And so obviously this is a housing strategy. How should it mention that we need to keep those locally owned, look after the tenancy or the ownership of those locally owned businesses as well? I have consistently harped on about Barber World Foods, which provides culturally specific food and fresh vegetables for pretty much all the cultures that are around, which is absolutely fantastic. And I'm assured that the preferred alignment holds that particular establishment harmless. And I know neighbors who own businesses on Barbara and up the hill, so how do we make sure that that gets tied into this? Because that's also about having people live and work where they can afford to do so.
So our next table of speakers, one will be Kimberly Branham from Prosper Portland, and she'll speak to that issue. And then following her, Metro will be joining us and talking about their Southwest Equitable Development Strategy, which the housing strategy is nested within, but it goes further to talk about economic and workforce development.
So I teed you up nicely. Thank you very much
it's a nice segue.
for being here. Thank you for your work.
Yeah.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Yeah, I was curious, Rachel, you mentioned a funding request to support community-based organizations. So can you tell me more about that? Like who's the request to and
And I can
how
talk.
much?
I can talk a minute about that, but I'm going to punt a little bit also to Pam because I think she can also talk because I think that the truth is that making sure that we're reaching folks along the corridor. So we want to be working with the organizations that are already there, working with people along the corridor, like Community Alliance of Tenants. I will say just quickly, I'm excited. One of the concepts I'm really excited about is potentially an oversight committee to make sure that once we set goals for this area, that we're also, from a community perspective, keeping track of how we're doing on that and measuring them. Sometimes just setting goals can make a difference, but really knowing that you're tracking the outcomes and that you're going to be talking about how you're doing, that can make a significant difference in how well you do at achieving those goals. But I would like to punt to Pam a bit because I think she can talk about this a little bit more than me.
Okay. I think we're really excited as community-based organizations. So our initial crew of organizations were Community Alliance of Tenants, OPAL, Environmental Justice Oregon, CPAW, as well as Unite Oregon, and Momentum Alliance. So those five organizations, we've been meeting for the last year to coordinate community engagement activities to ensure that community voices are being heard and then supported, right, to have those conversations, to unpack what plans are, what, understanding the difference between TriMet and Metro, right? This is really complicated if you don't already have 20 years, 30 years of experience or have sat on a commission before. So those are the types of training that we do, and that was what, the content of the 3 months was, but also putting it in context of people's experiences. So that's the engagement work that we do. And then we add that to the plan. Hopefully you'll like what you see and you'll be able to pass it. And with that adoption, we look forward to being able to do some core work around what I was talking about with the naturally occurring affordable housing preservation work, and then also thinking about where else in the community, from their community perspective, in terms of they know their own neighborhoods, right? Folks know where the best investments should be made in types of programs, as well as potentially where the Housing Bureau should be concentrating time and energy, and so as well as the Planning Bureau. So I think that level, at this point, I think we're talking about creating a community preservation work group of these organizations, as well as working with work groups like MET who are already on the ground to figure out how do we hold a work plan for the policies moving forward, but ensure that there is high levels of influence of community members who are directly impacted and most affected by the changes in the neighborhood.
So, is there a funding request and to whom? And how much?
Yes, we'll talk a little later about the Metro grant that we are receiving to do stationary planning, which will partially fund that request, and then a BPS budget request.
You're going to talk about that later or,
Yep.
or now?
Well, it's in context to kind of implementation, and so my hope was that some of the directors from the bureaus could lay out what their work plans are, and then talk about kind of how we're coordinating that all with community, which I think is the question there.
So it's a Metro, Metro station area planning grants and a BPS budget request?
Correct.
Okay. And I'd like to get some sense of the magnitude, I guess.
Sure. So the Metro grant was for $230,000, and we're proposing to put $50,000 aside in that budget for this work. And then I believe we have a $50,000 fall budget bump ask to round that work plan out.
And is that for a fiscal year, or is that for the duration of the project?
It is designed as seed money to get the first year and potentially a second year of kind of organizational chartering, so to more formalize their work together as a coalition, and then to tee up kind of a sustainability and financial long-term plan for private philanthropic support. So it's like a startup funding is one way to put it, and it's an extension of the planning work we've been doing in the corridor. So it's definitely not as Pam indicated at the beginning of a relationship. It's the continuation of a relationship from planning toward implementation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me, Mayor, we've lost captioning again.
We'll take a recess.
Is this a good time to swap out?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and
Okay.
swap?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
captioning there? Tess?
It's raised $30,000. We've raised 890 as of this work group. There'll be TV, there'll be mail, there'll be there'll be door knockers, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's going well.
Captioning, are you there?
I got a little flyer, AARP sent out a card that I got this week.
Yes, okay, looks like they are ready.
Urged, yes, for 102.
We're back in business?
All right.
Okay, great. The captioning is working. Why don't you introduce the second?
If you would have 102.
Yeah, absolutely. We have new folks at the table, and I want to introduce Shannon Callahan, Director at the Portland Housing Bureau, Eric Ingstrom, Principal Planner at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and Kimberly Branham, the Executive Director of Prosper Portland. And they're going to go into kind of what does this look like for implementation? What is the work plan? But as a brief reminder, I will just quickly go over some topics from our work session. We have these kind of 3 North Stars. I'm on slide 5 of our presentation. These 3 big goals that we think balances both the aspirational and the practical nature of this work. So over the next 10 years, we have a roadmap to commit and grow new resources, to prevent displacement of vulnerable households, and to create new housing for all. So those are our kind of 3 driving forces behind this work. And in vetting the strategy, I just want to remind Council that our advisory group consistently asked, are we going to do things differently this time? Right, that was the big question they asked. And they followed up with, and will what we do be enough? And those are huge questions that are still unanswered today, and it can only really be answered through implementation, and especially some of the early actions that we can take. And the big indicators of whether we're doing something different is truly whether we capitalize this strategy with enough resources, and also whether we support community partners to continue to work with us in the long term in an accountable way. So it goes back to that community preservation work group proposal. So I want to acknowledge we have a lot more to do to capitalize this strategy. It identifies potential sources, but many of those are decisions in the future. Some our agency partners can take action on, but some the voters will have to in the case of the regional housing bond. So this is just really a blueprint for our work. To answer the question about whether we're doing enough, we did measure kind of the actual need in the corridor and then set targets related to that need. So at least we know where we're trying to get to and what the actual need is. Portland and Tigard each set minimum housing targets based on current financial constraints and policies in place. And those, Shannon will give a little more detail about, but they would roughly, between Tigard and Portland, double the amount of regulated affordable housing in the corridor to about 1,600 units. Now, the stretch targets that we created were designed in a totally different way. They were designed to achieve big policy goals, and those are creating housing choice at each of the stations, each residentially zoned station, and preventing displacement where the risk is highest. And so that's where we came up with the 10 by 10 goal. So 10 stations with residential zoning, 10 buildings, and then an equal number of acquisitions where displacement risk is highest. So leadership is going to from the bureaus are going to give a little more detail about Portland's targets and then the work plan for moving the strategy into implementation. Shannon.
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Shannon Callahan of the Portland Housing Bureau. The Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy is the culmination of an unparalleled partnership to address transportation and housing in tandem as the region works toward the creation of the next light rail line. With careful planning, securing parcels for new development, and targeted efforts to prevent displacement and mitigate cultural displacement, the strategy aims to achieve equitable growth along the line. In Portland, we believe that the Housing Bureau has the means and the resources to achieve 300 to 350 new units of affordable housing along the corridor. To achieve the stretch targets will require additional resources. Ryan, thank you. We as a city have unfortunately learned very hard lessons when we have failed to prioritize affordable housing and the prevention of displacement when we make our transportation infrastructure investments. The strategy is more than just acknowledging those mistakes, but we are actively taking steps and adding resources to realize this plan. As I mentioned, we're prioritizing resources and the assets we have in the corridor to reach a portion of the targets, but new resources, again, will be required. The impending Metro bond is one potential source of new resources, as Director Branham will discuss. So are resources from tax increment financing districts. Our partnerships with organizations on the corridor will also be key to our success, ensuring that we are working with community-based organizations to engage households of color and low-income households is essential. And Eric Engstrom will detail our plans regarding the next steps for these partnerships. Underpinning all of the work we have planned in the corridor is the prevention of residential and cultural displacement. The corridor is an area of rich cultural diversity, and we want to work to implement new transportation infrastructure to ensure that the existing residents will benefit from that infrastructure. 2 specific strategies have been identified: the early acquisition of units through the capitalization of land and a property acquisition fund, and expanded citywide tenant supports, including legal support, tenant counseling, landlord training, and financial services. We also need to ensure that we are maximizing the development potential for affordable housing along the corridor. With the announcement of the light rail line and its alignment, available land for sale becomes scarce, and the market begins to speculate. So securing land early, as you have heard, for future development is imperative. A key partner in the implementation of the strategy and the lead agency on the light rail line, TriMet, has worked with the Housing Bureau on a memorandum of understanding to ensure the availability of land to reach the goals in this strategy. We've had a series of extremely productive and collaborative discussions to reach the outlines of a memorandum of understanding, which will be presented to you with your action next week on the locally preferred alternative. I'd like to thank the entire team at TriMet for prioritizing these discussions, their shared commitment with the City of Portland to prioritize affordable housing, ensuring that families of all incomes can benefit from the fast, affordable transit service that will link these families to jobs and educational opportunities. I'd briefly like to share with you a little bit of the concept behind the developing MOU with TriMet. TriMet, and you'll hear momentarily from Dave Unsworth of TriMet as well. TriMet will work with the Housing Bureau to assess parcels that they have acquired for the development of the light rail line, but are not ultimately needed for the operation of that line. They will offer excess property to the Housing Bureau, enough to accommodate 600 to 700 new units of affordable housing. These sites will be sold at a discounted value, the equivalent of the federal portion of the appraised value in accordance with Federal Transportation Authority rules. And the City of Portland will, in collaboration with TriMet, look to maximize development potential on adjacent to other light rail lines as well as the Southwest Corridor.
So Shannon, could I interrupt you for one moment? I just want to make clear that our current understanding with TriMet is that this MOU with TriMet to acquire the parcels, it will be executed this week prior to the LPA coming to the Portland City Council. Is that correct?
Both TriMet and the Housing Bureau have the commitment to bring you all of the draft terms related to housing with the City of Portland and the City of Portland and TriMet with your LPA. The MOU has a multitude of other signers besides the City of Portland. There's other regional partners, but we have agreed that we will have language that will be agreed upon before you vote on your locally preferred alternative next week.
Very good, and I'll thank them again later, but I saw Bernie Bottomley in here somewhere, and I wanted to just thank him and the TriMet crew for working with us and being very flexible and working hard to expedite this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Kimberly Branham with Prosper Portland, and you've heard a lot about the critical importance of preserving and increasing affordable housing for residents along the Southwest Corridor. And as Commissioner Fritz mentioned, we're also mindful of the potential impacts on small local businesses. So as you'll see from this slide, we estimate that there are almost 1,000 businesses located within a quarter mile of the corridor whose employees and access to customers stand to benefit from proximity to the transit improvements. There are also approximately 350 businesses whose property could be directly impacted by the light rail line's construction or related property acquisition, almost 70% of which have fewer than 10 employees, so really are small businesses. Over the past 4 years, retail vacancy rates in the corridor have consistently been below 5%, which suggests that absent new construction and tenanting opportunities, businesses that are displaced would have a challenging time finding new places to do business along the corridor. So as the planning efforts move forward, we will work closely with our partners at Metro and TriMet, the Portland Housing Bureau, and the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to develop tools and strategies to stabilize businesses and provide affordable commercial space as a key part of this project. Next slide, please. One of those funding sources that would provide tools for both affordable housing and affordable commercial space is tax increment finance. As you are all aware, there's a 15% cap on the acres within the city of Portland that can be within a tax increment finance district. As of today, there are about 2,500 acres that are available within the city of Portland for new or expanded tax increment finance districts under that cap. We've modeled two districts, one at approximately 930 acres, the other at approximately 500 acres, to provide you with a sense of the order of magnitude of resources that are available. With the set-aside policy of 45% for affordable housing, the larger district, as modeled, would yield approximately $54 million for the Portland Housing Bureau for their investments, which could fund an estimated 240 affordable housing units. These could also provide resources, the remaining $66 million could also provide resources through Prosper Portland to provide business loans and grants and investments in affordable commercial space. And it could also help support the local match for the light rail line itself. If 10% of the tax increment finance resources were devoted to the city's share of the local match, that would yield approximately $12 million. Next slide, please. Given needs in East Portland that we have heard and across neighborhood prosperity initiative districts, we are recommending that we reserve 2,500 acres for a new and expanded TIF district in these areas of Portland. This reservation gives communities in East Portland and in neighborhood prosperity initiative districts.
I'm really sorry. Believe it or not, we're having problems again. The crew upstairs has requested that we take a 5 to 10 minute recess so that they can fix whatever the problem is once and for all. So why don't we, it looks like it's about 5-ish minutes to 3. Why don't we reconvene at about 5 minutes after 3, and that'll give the crew a chance to work on it. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. Thank you.
So folks watching, we are having some substantial problems with the closed captioning system, and we'll be posting a message for people using the captioning system to let them know that the captioning system will not be functioning for the rest of the meeting, but because we have people here ready to provide testimony, we're going to go forward with the meeting, and all rebroadcasts of this council session will include the captioning, and we apologize to everybody who's inconvenienced by this. And for rebroadcast times, we'll post those on the mayor's website. And why don't we just leave this up for a minute so people can read it. There's a typo.
So,
Thank you, ma'am.
It's all right.
gets the gist.
Oh, yeah, we have a couple.
It's all right. It's not bad.
Thank you. I haven't done typing since.
It's not bad.
Well, you were
Turn your
standing
mic
up,
up.
which is also making it more difficult.
Performance anxiety of typing.
Yeah, as well.
All right, that's probably sufficient. Why don't we go ahead and continue from where we left off?
You can go back to, okay. So thank you. Given needs in East Portland, as well as the Neighborhood Prosperity Initiative districts, we recommend reserving 2,500 acres for new and expanded tax increment finance districts in these areas of Portland to provide these underserved parts of Portland with the time and space to discuss their priorities and a potential expanded use of tax increment finance. When debt in the Airport Way district is paid off in June of 2020, however, it will free up nearly 890 acres for expanded or new tax increment finance district, including acreage of a potential Southwest Corridor district. This timing would allow a TIF district to be in place well in advance of a new transit project. So we're happy to answer more questions about this and other funding tools, and appreciate the opportunity.
Commissioner Fish.
Kimberly, thank you very much. One question, would you remind us, under the new, it's been a while since we created a new urban renewal district.
Yes.
Under the new rules that have been worked out, what approval do we need to obtain in order to launch a new urban renewal district?
Thank you, Commissioner. So under the new, under regulation today, we need an affirmative vote of City Council. It would go in front of our board for recommendation, in front of the Prosper Portland Board, go to City Council for a vote. We have a consult and confer recommendation, so we would go in front of Multnomah County and send information to other jurisdictions, Portland Public Schools and others, to alert them and be providing them with information. But my understanding is that it is still the case that City Council is the sole body that votes.
Thank you very much.
So going through your math, which I guess that was like 20 minutes ago now, so I kind of forgot it, but
sure.
You were showing the revenue to be raised from urban renewal, and
that slide.
And something like 10% of the portion that would go to Prosper would be available for the local match, which I think is about $12 million and our local match, I believe, is in the $80 to $90 million range. So I'm curious, where, am I right in what I just said, first of all, I guess?
So I was suggesting that if we put 10%, Commissioner, into 10% of the entire urban renewal area, which is similar to what we allocated within the Milwaukee Light Rail Orange Line, about 10% of the district, that would be about $12 million. So if it were 20% of the district, then that would be $24 million or so. I just wanted to give an example of the range of resources that would be available for the local match.
And I guess, and I've told you this before, that seems like a low range, given there's a need for $80 to $90 million. I mean, hasn't the city always relied on urban renewal for its share of local match, or am I wrong about that?
It has. So the interstate urban renewal area, for example, has a maximum indebtedness of approximately $300 million. City Council allocated about $30 million from that, so about 10% of the overall urban renewal area to the light rail line. I could go through other examples, but I think it's been an important portion of it. Part of the reason we wanted to be clear about the acreage that's available and the anticipated revenue that could be generated is because it is lower, and maximum indebtedness would be lower in this district than it has been in other areas. And that's partly because of the way that the tool works after Measure 5. And it's also because of revenue sharing, but it's also because in a neighborhood that doesn't have a significant amount of high density buildings and where there's not a lot of undeveloped parcels that could be redeveloped for higher purposes, we don't anticipate that there will be a significant level of property tax increase, although we are counting on at least 3% annually.
Mm-hmm. And the $30 million that was available for interstate, the interstate line from interstate renewal, was that the entirety of the local match, or did the city council come up with other sources?
City Council came up with other sources, but I'm going to defer. I'm like looking for Teresa, who can talk about where the rest of the resources came from.
I guess just the point I'm trying to make is it seems like the amount being relied upon from urban renewal for the local match is low.
Yeah.
And, that's going to leave, I mean, it's not my problem. It's going to be my colleague's problem to come up with that match, but it does seem that that is low. And, we need the project to happen for all these other good things to happen too. All the housing opportunities and everything else to arise. We need the light rail project to be paid for too. So.
Yeah, understood. It's, I think we have, as Bureau Directors, been holding conversations around the different tools that could be put to bear in addition to tax increment finance. There were a lot of creative resources that were brought to bear for the city's local match on the Orange Line. So there was a local improvement district and other types of things that PBOT can speak to, because in that case as well, there was only $10 million of tax increment finance resources that were applied. But I understand completely what you're saying.
Okay.
Thank you.
So BPS's role in implementation, I'll speak to both land use and the work we're doing to talk about the publicly owned land that already exists along the corridor. With the help of Metro and their 2040 grant program, BPS is gearing up to lead some station area planning, really a new neighborhood plan for the West Portland Town Center around the Barber Transit Center and Crossroads, and that's going to begin this year. We're also doing work in South Portland near the Gibbs Station to fine-tune zoning in that area. So it's important to not only talk about the affordable housing, but also the market rate targets we have and the growth management aspect of this. On the publicly owned properties, we've identified a number of them that already are in public ownership that could have a potential for redevelopment on the line, and we're exploring scenarios on those sites. One, the Ross Island Bridgehead, we understand that both the City of Portland and ODOT jointly own some land that is under that current highway infrastructure. If the highway was removed, that potentially frees up several acres of land that could be used for redevelopment, which could support 300 to 450 housing units in that area.
Under the Ross Island Bridge?
Not under the bridge, under the current ramps that connect it to NATO Parkway through the Bridgehead project. There's several blocks. Also at the Barber Transit Center, if the transit center has a light rail station that causes redevelopment of that site, there's the potential, if we went vertical with that, to put a couple hundred additional units there. Portland Community College is interested in development of affordable housing on the Sylvania campus, a short walk from the 53rd Avenue station. The transit improvements make it possible for them to consider reallocating land from parking into more intensive uses. So that's an opportunity. And I understand Tigard staff will also talk about potential opportunities in Tigard as well. In particular, the Tigard Transit Center is a TriMet property, I believe. You spoke earlier, and there were some questions earlier about the working group that Ryan spoke of. And what we're trying to do there is we've learned through the research into best practices on this that other cities in this situation have been successful putting together a collaborative group that includes stakeholders like those who spoke to earlier, as well as governments and private philanthropy, and organizing that group of people into a more formal entity to shadow the development of the light rail and not only do outreach, continue doing outreach to the community, and doing that deeper implementation directly with the community, but also using that as a platform to raise money and marshal private resources. That's been an approach that's worked, I believe, successfully in both Denver and Minneapolis, for example. And so we're trying to learn lessons from some of our peer cities and do more to encourage that kind of private sector and philanthropy collaboration with the city on this line. And that's partly why we're trying to seek, Ryan described it as seed money, to continue this group discussion going and grow that beyond where we've been so far and get it involved in implementation so that there's a partner to the city's efforts here and to the efforts of TriMet and Metro so that we can all continue to sit at the table and work those issues through. So what was referred to before is we do have some committed money from an existing Metro grant that we're going to put into that, and then we have put in a fall budget adjustment request of $50,000 to support that, so that's what that was about.
I'll say that's actually a nice segue to the next presenters are going to be Metro, TriMet, and Tigard. And Metro is hosting the equitable development strategy process over the next year, and they have a much broader table they'll describe, but our hope is that this seed money for a community preservation work group allows the community-based organizations to maintain a presence, and then the bigger discussion of a bigger, kind of more collaborative table is answered through the SWEDS process. So that's kind of the back and forth that Portland and Metro have had. And our emphasis has been really supporting those community-based organizations.
Commissioner Fritz.
So is that where my questions about commercial are going to be answered?
Yes, okay. They're coming up now.
I'll keep waiting.
Thank you.
So joining us is Sean Farley from the city of Tigard, Malou Wilkerson from Metro, and Dave Unsworth from TriMet. And I want to thank Sean and Kenny Asher, the Director of Community Development, and the whole the Tigard Council, just for their partnership and their champion of this work. They've been incredible to work with, and I just wanted to be sure to thank them for that partnership. I'm glad this wasn't just a Portland thing or just a Tigard thing.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Sean Farley with the City of Tigard, and City of Tigard has really appreciated partnering with the City of Portland and other regional and community partners on developing this coordinated strategy for the entire Southwest Corridor. Tigard's facing the same housing pressures as Portland, and we need to take action so people can afford to continue living in their communities, especially if we make this major light rail investment. The Tigard City Council acknowledged the strategy in July as a toolbox of potential tools to address the need for more affordable housing. Even before the strategy was complete, Tigard has been taking action. 2017, Tigard voters approved an urban renewal district, and Tigard voters have to approve it. The Tigard Triangle, which is planned to have 2 Southwest Corridor light rail stations. Our first allocation of TIF money in that district was to support a affordable housing, community partner for affordable housing project that Rachel mentioned earlier that should be breaking ground in a few months. Also in this area known as the Tigard Triangle, we've done a rezone with very streamlined development code. Actually, no parking minimums are required in this area. We're also kicking off a Metro-funded project to figure out how we can implement this urban renewal district in an equitable manner. Other things, as was mentioned earlier, in March, our City Council approved a local SDC exemption for regulated affordable housing for 80% AMI and below. So it is going on in Washington County. And we're also in the process of developing a code update to address the need for missing middle housing, which City of Portland is also working on. So we're really excited to continue working with our regional partners. Tigard will also be a signatory to this MOU with TriMet. Hope to get that signed soon and agreed to. And we also want to continue participating in a community-centered coalition to implement the strategy.
Mr. Farrelly, let me just ask you a question since you've been kind enough to join us today and be patient. Would you remind us, what's the population of Tigard?
It's just over 50,000.
And your city charter requires a vote of the people, not a vote of the council, for creating an urban renewal district?
That's correct.
And what do you estimate is the need in the city of Tigard for affordable housing defined as below 80% of AMI?
Well, the strategy, we have a goal of 600 to 800 units, but the need is higher than that, we realize. So our goal is to get 600 to 800 units built in the next 10 years, but the need is greater than that.
And to what extent is a shortage of buildable land one of your challenges?
It is a major challenge. We're looking at redevelopment. The Tigard Triangle area is somewhat underdeveloped. There's different areas of it, but there is potential there for redevelopment. We don't have very much vacant land whatsoever. One of our last pieces of vacant land is actually under construction to build 240 units of affordable housing in partnership with Washington County Housing Department.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good afternoon. I'm Malu Wilkinson from Metro, and I'm just going to quickly go over kind of what our role has been in this project. I'm not going to talk about the light rail project because you will hear about that next week. But at Metro, our focus has really been on leveraging and aligning the investments that we and you and other partners make to support our shared goals and get us towards our vision, our 2040 vision of great places across the region for all types of people to be able to live in and enjoy. And so we also acknowledge that any major public investment can bring change, and some of that change is welcome to some people, and some of the change is not welcome and is challenging. And so that's why, one of the reasons why we applied for a grant from the Federal Transit Administration a couple of years ago for equitable development. And we wanted to be sure that we could pair that work on equitable development with continued study of the Southwest Corridor Light Rail project. And that was also why we were glad that we had the money to be able to provide to Portland and to Tigard for this equitable housing work. So we know that you need to take a complete look, and investing anywhere causes changes, and we want to be sure that we are able to help all people take advantage of those changes. So the overall Southwest Corridor Equitable Development Strategy, as Ryan has implied, it includes actions to support housing choices, which really Portland and Tigard have taken the lead on defining what that looks like. And what we've also been focusing on is job creation, small business growth and support, and workforce development. And our goal is that we can prepare communities for the changes and opportunities that light rail investment can bring to the Southwest Corridor through a community-driven process that's really bringing community members into the decision-making process. This is an approach that we've been really trying to implement at Metro. The PAL Division Steering Committee was one of our first examples of really bringing community members into the decision-making process, and the Equitable Development Strategy is another way that we are working hard to do that. So we have the Equitable Development Strategy will be defined by next summer. We're working right now very hard to figure out how it can be implemented together and keep the group that we have, that Ryan's talked about, at the table into the future, so that you keep those voices together with the agencies, figuring out how we can create the places that we want in the Southwest Corridor. We also have, we've allocated about $275,000 of our grant from the Federal Transit Administration for early implementation projects. We're calling them pilot projects, 2 of them are focused on business and workforce development. 3 of them are housing, and 1 of them is to continue the type of work that you heard Pam talk about in terms of bringing new groups to the table and helping them learn how to be involved effectively in our processes. So those pilot projects are going on right now, and we're excited about them, and we'll be able to tell you, they're in the middle right now. We'll be able to tell you more about them in another few months. The other way that we are hoping that we'll be continuing to play a role in housing and equitable development is through our transit-oriented development program that we have at Metro, where we invest in housing and multifamily development across the region in places that are transit supportive. And we're hoping to have an active role in securing land around future light rail stations in the Southwest Corridor. We also are hoping to be able to expand our role in housing if the voters approve a regional housing bond next month. If it passes, we'll really be working hard with our local partners to invest in their housing priorities, and one of those is the Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy that is in front of you today. And I guess really the last thing that I want to say is that we can't do any of this as one agency alone. It really takes us working collaboratively together to be successful, because we bring different perspectives. We're able to bring different voices and different tools to the table. And we really appreciate and commend the work that your staff, especially Ryan, have done over the last couple of years in getting this equitable housing strategy in front of you today, and we're excited to keep working together in the future.
Thank you.
I'm Dave Unsworth, work at TriMet. Thanks for having us here today. I think I would kind of riff off what Malou was saying. We recognize that affordable housing is both a city and a regional-wide priority. We need to work creatively and aggressively to address that, and TriMet is leaning into that hard, and we're willing to move forward with that. And we show that through a couple different methods. One is the Memorandum of Agreement on Affordable Housing. So as TriMet purchases property for the project, where we have to stage property, when we're done with the project, we look to dispose of that property. And so through the agreement that we've reached with the City of Portland in principle, and it's an agreement that we have both with City of Portland, Metro, Washington County, and Tigard to do affordable housing on remnant parcels that are left over by the project. And this essentially outlines what Shannon talked about before. We're committing up to 600 to 700, locating and identifying 600 to 700 locations for 600 to 700 affordable housing units along the alignment. We're looking to write down the value of that to the degree that we are allowed to by law, federal law, returning that federal share back to FTA, who's the principal funder of it. And so I think we're really excited for that, and I'm hopeful, along with Shannon, that we will have this executed next week. We had a meeting with the City of Tigard and Washington County on that earlier this morning. TriMet's already doing this. So we are on property that we own. We are partnering with the City of Portland, nonprofits in Clackamas County, 495 units that were currently under development on TriMet property. So this is extending what we're doing now to what we will be doing hopefully in the future when we build the Southwest Corridor line. And I think that also builds on our low-income transit, our low-income fare. So getting people to and from work in a more effective way really improves both that access and where people can live. So TriMet really feels like it's part of the solution. TriMet in this region, Portland has been one of the showcases around the country and internationally of how you build light rail. I think this is the next new model of how you build light rail with affordable housing at the same time.
Thank you. And thank you, all three of you, and we appreciate your being here. We appreciate your patience. Commissioner Fritz, did you have a question? Very good.
Yeah, so when can I see the strategy on preserving affordable commercial?
We will have an equitable development strategy by next summer, and so we'll have pieces of it along the way. And what we can do is we can work with your staff to get you information on the equitable development strategy that's kind of on its way sooner, if that would be useful for you.
I think it's a piece that needs to come with. And by the way, thank you, TriMet, for your partnership on this, and also the City of Tigard and indeed Metro. It's really great that you're we're all working together in a much more focused way than perhaps we have in previous times. But that is the other piece, I think, particularly since, unbeknownst, well, I hadn't realized that the city's rezoning doesn't require commercial in any zone. So I'm very concerned that if we have a only focus on affordable housing, we end up making that less livable because we don't have the services that go with it or the jobs that go with businesses.
So if I can just take a minute to talk to you about one of the pilot projects is with Mercy Corps Northwest, and they have a program that they're actively working on in Seattle. It's been in place for a while, but they haven't had it in the Portland region. And what their pilot project is focusing in the Southwest Corridor, working with small business owners, particularly small business owners who are disadvantaged in some way, working with them in both developing business plans to be able to weather changes in the community and grow their businesses. And they also have a matching fund to match their savings so that they're able to invest in their small business locally. And so that's just one of the examples of the types of tools that we're looking at having in place in the Southwest Corridor.
So are you envisioning having a committee of local business owners?
We would love to see that happen, and that is another little component of the pilot project that Mercy Corps Northwest is working on.
And I'd be happy to work with you with some suggestions on that, because we have some thriving small businesses now that don't really need any assistance for investments, or they just need to not be disrupted and displaced. So similar in some ways to the housing. So yes, if you could please make sure you engage me in my office, I'd really appreciate that.
Here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fish.
You know, it reminds me that we have a partner in Venture Portland that represents all of our neighborhood business districts. So they may be the perfect complement to what you're trying to do here in terms of matching you with businesses in the area. You mentioned Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps, though, has piloted a project locally where they allow people in areas that are changing quickly, rapidly, to acquire an ownership interest in commercial real estate. And it's like a REIT, but it's not really a REIT, and it's above my pay grade in terms of being able to do it. I think John Haynes is the only person that can actually explain it. But they've acquired properties in East Portland, and I hope that part of this affordable commercial space strategy looks for opportunities for Mercy Corps in concert with local residents to acquire an ownership stake in some of the mixed-use development, because that I think is the marriage of both a good idea and an opportunity.
Commissioner Fish, it's the Community Investment Trust that Mercy Corps has in East Portland, and they are looking at how that could potentially work in the Southwest Corridor. And they are also partnering with Venture Portland. So I think we have a lot of those pieces coming together, and we don't have a full presentation on it right now to talk to you about, but it's very exciting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ryan, I know you're going to give us a little bit of a primer on what we're voting for before we go to public testimony, but I thought given the testimony we just had, this would be the appropriate place for me to read the statement from Commissioner Udaley, who wanted to be here today but could not, so she asked if I'd read the statement on her behalf. With the Southwest Corridor project, Portland has the opportunity to deliver high-capacity transit service and safety improvements to one of the most congested parts of our city. In doing so, we can make major strides in achieving our climate goals and provide real transportation access to jobs and opportunity for all Portlanders. It's not often that we get to make such transformative investments, and this is truly exciting. At the same time, we need to make sure that these investments meet the needs of households of all sizes and incomes, that it does not displace existing communities, and that the benefits accrue to the people who need them the most. We know that the housing and transportation constitute the majority of average household costs. Improved transportation service is only effective if the benefits are not offset by rising housing costs. That's why it's so important that we have developed the equitable housing strategy, and why we need to make sure that we deliver on it. Before adopting the locally preferred alternative, we need to be certain that the affordable housing is guaranteed as part of this project. As Transportation Commissioner, I've directed PBOT to complete a signed MOU with TriMet ahead of next week's vote that commits the parties to the acquisition and development of property expressly for affordable housing along the proposed Southwest Corridor light rail line. And again, that is from Commissioner Hugh Daly.
All right. Thank you for our jurisdictional partners for coming today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
So before you is a resolution. It adopts the housing strategy as binding city policy. It directs city bureaus to work with community-based organizations to report to City Council before each budget cycle on the progress and the near-term priorities. It directs city bureaus to bring a financing plan back to City Council. It directs BPS to conduct station area planning, and it also directs all bureaus working with Metro to advance racial equity through the Southwest Equitable Development Strategy and through deployment of a regional bond, should it pass. And so that's the resolution before you. I also want to note that the Planning and Sustainability Commission has been very active in this project, both on housing and light rail, and have put forth letters on both projects. And Andre Baugh is also here to read that letter to you as normal protocol for a Bureau of Planning practice. So is there time for that to open up for public testimony?
Yeah, why don't we start with that, please?
Great.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We'll start with this gentleman, and then we'll call them in order.
Andre, if you actually testify one more time this week, you get a special prize.
I am done, probably for the year, hopefully. Andre Baugh, Planning Sustainability Commissioner. The Planning Sustainability Commission expresses our cautious optimism and support for the proposed Southwest Corridor strategy, and I'll talk to you about a little bit of our hesitancy why that is. The strategy is well researched and designed to address the near-term housing crisis and the long-term housing needs in the corridor in terms of prevention of displacement and gentrification of low-income and people of color. It addresses the needs of the vulnerable. It involves those people in their community. And as has been said earlier today, we must not repeat the mistakes of the past, and we need our political leaders to champion this work. And really, I think some of the requests that are being made are about having champions from the community be in the process all the way through. And this is a powerful statement that the letter has. If the City Council is not prepared to capitalize its portion of the housing strategy, then we ask that you not adopt the housing strategy. And what that would mean is you not build the project. Really don't promise and not deliver. And I'll get to why we're saying that. First, we're asking you to make the investment to the investment fund, CBO's request to form the community preservation group, to make that funding, to make an ongoing annual investment above the current levels into the anti-displacement services, make a one-time multi-million-dollar investment into the general funds of an apartment building acquisition fund. These are all things that are in the plan. Form a Southwest Corridor urban renewal area with strong guardrails against funds being used for anything other than affordable housing until the housing strategy has been fully implemented and the targets met, and follow through on developing proposals and funding for new tenant protections. The reason that we were skeptical, we endorsed the housing strategy, but we're skeptical is history around TIFs are, and Dan Salzman was pointing to it a little bit in his questions, TIFs have been primarily the basis for the city's match. And if you look historically, lately they've been changed, but historically TIFs have been an infrastructure transportation strategy. And we're asking that really, and Prosper Portland has really put forward a strategy that says, no, housing will be funded first, and that money may come from transportation. That's a significant shift, and whether or not you fund it that way is going to depend on whether the strategy kind of moves out of the box and whether it's implemented. Funding to fund the community groups and invest in their long-term championship of this program and them being involved in the decision-making is something that is going to take some funding, not only seed money, I think, but probably long-term money to do. And again, it's funding that has to come from the city council. Funding for non-displacement, anti-displacement activities. That is an activity that the community put forward as a high priority, almost their number one priority. That's something that council recently said, I'm not sure. The community is saying that's really what we want in this corridor. We have to fund that to go forward. So our skepticism was, great plan, we love it, we really want to implement it, and we think it's a model, as has been said before, for how to do equitable investments in transportation, but it means that not only you, but future councils have to live up to the commitment down the road so that you capitalize the investments that you make today 10 years from now. And who's on council, and do they remember that their job 10 years from now is to capitalize the early investments that are made now to keep the affordable housing in the affordable housing portfolio. And so it's not only what you're going to do early on, but are we going to long-term make those investments that hold that portfolio together? And so as the PSC, we're hoping that you make the investments, that you do make the commitments, and because it's a strong group that has come before you today, before me today, and really expressed that transportation is an equitable development for all of us, and just not for the people that have wealth. And we have a great plan to show that. And the PSC is supportive in implementing a plan like that, the one today. Thank you.
Can I just make one?
Commissioner Fish.
So Andre, appreciate you being here back-to-back days, sharing your wisdom and a historical perspective. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't on the council when it adopted the Albina plan, but I think that's the elephant in the room. That's the cautionary tale that we're talking about. And it was a lengthy, complicated plan with lots of commitments signed by a who's who that was superseded by a light rail plan, and then market forces took over in ways that were both foreseeable and unforeseeable. So I want to make sure that I understand from your point of view how history can be different here. First of all, we are specifically addressing an equitable housing strategy, anticipating there will be market disruptions that displace and gentrify. So that's a plus. Two, it isn't a phone book thick plan with mind-numbing complexity. There are very specific components here that are going to be fairly straightforward for us to determine. Mm-hmm. Third, you're saying to us, don't go forward unless you're going to fund it. Don't do a bait and switch. And yeah. Fourth, I think the one area, though, that I would caution us is if we learn from history, keep the plan relatively straightforward, develop an equitable housing strategy, agree to fund it in a way up front that is ironclad, so it doesn't, there's no new policy choice that comes along, the way light rail did in inner Northeast Portland. Even when we do all that, I still think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't fully predict market forces. And so I hear you loud and clear about the lessons of history. Keep it simple. Don't move forward unless you're going to fund it. The only thing I would just caution us is, despite all of our best intentions, there could be market forces beyond our control, where at some point someone says, "Boy, if we'd only done a little more," and the like. Well, we don't know where that's going to land, but we can make the commitment as a council to fund it at an agreed upon level with the community, understanding that it still may not be sufficient. Is that a fair comment?
That was a fair comment. And I want to add, the thing that it gives me hope, I have probably been critical of this because of all the issues you listed out and listed in here, but is that the community is really part of the future of this. They've endorsed, they want to be on the ground working to produce that future and talk about their housing and how does it work, and maybe owners and a lot of different things than before. And the other significant thing is TriMet, and you heard Dave say it, they're leaning in around affordable housing. That's significant. I mean, TriMet has one goal: build a train, get people on it, let's get going. And they get it. They're saying, hey, we need affordable housing to be a successful agency. And so you have partners. It's not just the city of Portland. You have Tigard and Metro and a lot of people that are kind of getting on board with you. So the market forces are going to come no matter, you can't predict or stop those, but with all the partners, I think you've got a better strategy about how to address them. And it's just not the city of Portland. So I'm encouraged, but I wanted, our letter is offering those cautions from that standpoint.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate your being here. Commissioner Fritz.
So I appreciate your sentiment, and yes, this does need to be funded if it's going to be done right. When I read your letters, the Planning and Sustainability Commission's letter several weeks ago, my first thought was this is a boatload of money. And we, a few months ago, heard about the outer division strategy and the need for housing and investment there to present displacement even for bus rapid transit, which I think we all agree is probably less attractive than light rail. And yet we didn't collectively say, by gosh, we have to do this. So did the Planning and Sustainability Commission discuss what would be the trade-offs in putting millions of dollars of general fund into this project versus continuing to fund the other things that general fund does?
Yes. Implicit in this is that council not lose sight of East Portland, division, and the housing needs in the rest of in Portland. So it's do this, but don't stop or say it's a trade-off between if you do this, we don't invest in East Portland, we don't invest in division. We know there's a limited pot of money, but you have to do everything, because if you only do this, what happens to East Portland, what happens to division, and so are we just moving the players around? And so we are saying keep your eye on the ball in the other areas also.
Yeah, the challenge is we don't have an infinite amount of money, and so if we don't have more general fund, there has to be trade-offs. And so I guess I can't promise to you that, yes, I will do what the Planning Commission suggested, because it's always going to be what's available and what's the most crucial place to invest it. And also, I do think we need to invest in this, because unlike the Orange Line that I was on the council for, where we knew this was coming and we didn't do what's called for here, and lo and behold, we again have displacement and lack of affordable housing. Yeah. So let's learn from the recent past as well as the far past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony. Carla, how many people do we have signed up for public testimony?
I show 3.
3 very patient people. All right. So 3 minutes each, name for the record. And you know the drill. The microphones slide around about 6 inches is right. 30 seconds before your time is up, the yellow light will flash. And when your time is up, the red light will flash.
I show John Gibbon, Amina Omar, and Layla Omar.
Very good. Sir, why don't you go ahead and start for us? Thank you for being here.
My name is John Gibbon. I'm speaking on my own behalf today. I am first vice president of Sweeney after a long year as president of Sweeney. And the person designated to follow the Southwest Corridor project for Sweeney. And I guess I would take it from another skeptical point of view. I understand and appreciate what Commissioner Fritz has said about our shared Southwest area. We've got a lot of lack of infrastructure. We've got stormwater issues that are huge in relationship to the area that I'm most familiar with, where I got on TriMet today to ride downtown here at the crossroads. There's still a big issue to be decided there. And when I spoke to TriMet last week and urged them to support the preferred line, I also told them that, you know, we're glad you're coming to the crossroads, but understand the crossroads is going to be probably the greatest technical challenge, geographic challenge they've ever put in their light rail system. And the alternatives we have right now are not great alternatives. TriMet last week did decide to back off a little bit on their support for the Taylor's Ferry alternative and make it still on the table, but not their preferred alternative for crossing at the crossroads. That just enhanced my statement to them that they needed to do a stakeholders committee with the neighborhoods and with all the communities that you've heard from today on that issue, because walking here today, I walked a mile to get to the Crossroads Transit Station. I walked probably a quarter of that, maybe, on streets with sidewalks. And that's only sidewalks on one side of the street. And the rest of it was either on private paths or on some streets that are very wide and very usable for walking. But there are limits in Southwest that people need to understand. As I guess I'll finish with one story. Former Mayor Hales, when he was up there talking about the crossroads with me when he was running 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, I guess, was patting himself on the back because he got a detention pond put in front of one of the businesses, the motel in the Crossroads area. And he said that was one of the first times the city of Portland ever put in a detention pond. And those are the kind of things that we need more of up there to make this project work. And so we're going to have some big budget issues to face in this. Still, you should do this because it gives us some more resources to address those issues with. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your being here. Welcome. And the microphones move too. They just slide around. There you go.
Hi, my name is Layla Omar.
Can you make it a little closer? Just keep it about 6 inches away, a little bit further down.
Oh.
There we go. Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Hi, my name is Layla Omar. I've been living in Portland about I think 17 years. Originally from Africa to Dallas, Dallas to Minnesota, Minnesota to Portland. It was Southwest Portland. We never moved from Southwest Portland. And we really appreciated you guys for considering helping us with low-income housing in Southwest Portland. We have problems also in Southwest Portland with the management of the apartment that my mom used to live at, which was Lauderdale. It's called Lauderdale apartment, and that we lived there for about maybe 10 years, but the manager will keep the old manager was keep threatening my mom and my other people that lived there for like there's certain time that people could come, and there's certain places that certain ways that we could walk or some ways we can talk because of our culture or because the certain way how we can cook, the certain way, the smell and all that stuff, which was I thought it was racist, very racist, because we don't tell anybody to. It's our culture. We cannot leave our culture, the way we cook, the way we eat, the way we talk. And one of the accident that happened was one of the older senior people that lived in those apartments. He was going to the mosque. He was across the street from Lordale apartment. He sunk because there was no stop. They don't have a stop sign on the. You have to walk across the street without. They don't have the thing. So it was in the middle. It was in the middle, like around 7. It was dark, and so a car hit him. He got hit by a car, and we was going toward the mosque. So they took him to the hospital. So everybody heard in our neighborhood, in our community, that he got in the car. So they were come visit him in the middle of the night, daytime and nighttime. So the manager thought that there's people living in this apartment. More than there were him and his wife, but the manager thought there was a lot of people because there were a lot of people coming back in and out. That she thought that there were people living there without asking the tenants who lives there and the whole. That she just assumed that a lot of people live there, and she gives 72-hour notice to get evicted because there are people coming back and forth. And then they got a lawyer, so it was really challenging. We have especially those apartments. We have really challenging landlords in those apartments. And if you guys trying to invest to buy a building or an area, I think that place would be very convenient, very good for our community. Because our community, we go to Markham. I went to high school, Wilson High School, and I graduated at PCC for associate. And it's really important if we get those area apartments complex. I really appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Amin again. I have a similar story to what Leila just said. In the same complex, my cousin who just moved from Kenya to Portland 2 years ago, it was his first year living in that apartment. So what had happened is their stove top was not working well, so they called the maintenance to the manager, and then the manager sent the maintenance. But at the same time, the manager came along with the maintenance, and then caught the wife cooking, took pictures with her knowledge, with her telling her, with her consent, without telling her, like asking her, is that okay if I take a picture? So she just took pictures while she was cooking and took those photos to the landlord and told the landlord the reason why her stove is not working because she cooks a lot. So, and I didn't understand the whole thing, why she did that. But she was saying that that's the reason these people, they cook a lot, and these people have a lot of families based on our culture, like Leila was saying. So, and it seems like there's more people, Somali people live in that community. It's called Ludan apartment. So because it's close to Markham School and it's close to the mosque, it's very convenient for a lot of folks in our area, especially like the older men who could just walk to the mosque. Well, he doesn't drive. Like my cousin, like I was saying, my cousin who got put through that, he got 72-hour notice to get evicted from his apartment. And he was just brand new to this country. He didn't speak English or anything. And he didn't have any support, like any money. So we were trying to help him out. And then finally, I think the owner of the place just kind of came through and looked at the house and looked at the place. And he's like, this place is maintained. It's really well taken care of, so he didn't understand the whole thing of what they're trying to do. So the two people at the office got fired right away, immediately. But my cousin still lives there in that apartment, and that's the best place to be bought, I think. Well, thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you for sharing today.
You'll be interested to know that the Bureau of Transportation has plans to improve Capitol Highway, and I'm hoping put lights on the crossing between the mosque.
Yeah, that's very, because it has been so many incidents on that area where, well, my kids go to the madrasa over there at the mosque, So
Yeah.
I'm kind of afraid sometimes when they walk through that cross, the little, I don't know if you're familiar with that area.
Yeah.
Sometimes the car won't even stop, even though
Right.
there's a stop sign.
Well,
But
I
then
think they're going to
They just go through, and I have experienced that myself personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's dangerous when they have those crosswalks without the light. So there is a plan to do many more improvements. So I'm
would be
glad that
great.
you live there.
Yeah.
Some of
Thank
that
you.
naturally occurring affordable housing along the Capitol Highway corridor, if you travel it very often like I have for years, you'll know that they're some of the biggest contributors to some of the stormwater problems we have along there. Some of the maintenance that hasn't been done on those buildings has been on their storm drainage systems, and it contributes to the problems we're dealing with in that area. So.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, all three of you.
Thank you very much.
Carla, was there anybody else signed up?
That's all who signed up.
Very good. Colleagues, did you have more questions for staff, or should we go right to the roll?
Right to-
All right, Carla, please call the roll on the resolution.
Fritz.
I very much appreciate all the work that's gone into this, all the partnerships. Thank you very, very much. And particularly the partnerships with the community. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I know you're going to keep involved because it's our neighborhood and that you want it to develop and be a prosperous place for everybody who lives and works near there. I do feel slightly more comfortable about the working part and the commercial, and I look forward to being involved in the discussions about how to keep the small businesses prosperous there and to add what I can do as a neighbor of this area. Thank you, everybody. Aye.
Fish.
Well, it's a great hearing, and thanks to everybody for taking time to join us and to spend the afternoon with us. This is a solid framework. It's going to take new resources to fund out what we want to do, which is one of the reasons that I'm spending, along with a number of people in this room, a lot of time trying to shepherd both measures 102 and 26-199 to a successful conclusion. The regional housing bond, if adopted by the voters, would include over $250 million in additional resources in Multnomah County, which would be very useful as we try to finance the Southwest Corridor Plan. I appreciate that we're trying to learn from the mistakes of the past, and I appreciate those who've come forward to share their stories, to remind us that we can repeat the mistakes of the past unless we're very careful. And I hope to be on this council for a long time, and long enough so that we can celebrate some wins of doing things differently and really getting this transportation and affordable housing nexus right. Because as was earlier noted, the principal cost that households are now incurring is a rent plus transportation cost. And I'm encouraged by the work that's been done, and I look forward to future presentations. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Aye.
Wheeler.
Well, I want to thank everybody who testified today, and I want to thank all of our partners, of course. I particularly want to thank TriMet for working collaboratively with Planning and Sustainability and the Housing Bureau and Prosper Portland on really looking at how we support the dual goals of both housing and transportation. I know a lot of effort went into bringing this forward together, and I look forward to seeing the final agreement between the city and TriMet sometime next week. While Portland and our partners work very diligently to prevent displacement together, we make sure that we're building the affordable housing and the commercial space to help Portlanders thrive. And last but not least, I just want to say that this is a very important initiative because it intentionally brings the transportation and the workforce and affordable housing piece together. And as Commissioner Fish noted, there are also issues on the November ballot that could help further this process. And I would encourage people as they look at their ballots to do so very carefully with the intention of supporting any measure that could help us move forward with this affordable housing, frankly, obligation. So thank you all. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted, and we are adjourned.
you.